Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you very much for inviting us here this morning. We're here this morning to provide a brief update on Metro's service reductions proposal to give committee members our most current information while also being mindful of inquiries from the public on this important issue. And as you mentioned, to put in context recent financial forecasts that have aided our planning. Our service reduction proposal would be rescinded if Proposition 1 is adopted by voters. The funding projected to be generated by Proposition 1 to fund Metro Transit, the King County Unincorporated Road Services, and local city road services, if adopted by voters, would be sufficient to sustain Metro's current service level. We're also planning in the event Proposition 1 is not adopted by voters. So ever since we identified the problem that grew into our national Great Recession, we have managed and reduced our cost growth, increased our fares and other revenues, and have made several major changes to our system, as well as identified potential larger system cuts. We've done all this very transparently to the public and with lots of information, to the point where these questions are often, are we still in this position, and why are we in that position? So I think it's instructive to review on service alone over the past few years. In 2010 and 11, we cut about 2% of the lowest used trips in our system, about 75,000 annual service hours, and we reinvested those hours in crowded and unreliable services. Also that year, and part of our implementation of audit recommendations and our performance audit of 2009, in 2010 and 11, we implemented schedule efficiencies, which primarily reduced the amount of rest breaks that operators have, our bus drivers have, while on routes, saving about $13 million per year ongoing. In 2011, we provided our riders and the public with information on potential major service reductions that would have been necessary had the legislature not given King County the congestion reduction charge option, and the county council chose to levy that vehicle fee, which was a temporary $20 fee for 2 years. In 2012, we completed the largest service change in Metro's history, and over the course of that year, we reinvested 100,000 annual hours of service from lower used routes to more crowded routes in our system. And then in 2013, in the first of 2 service guidelines reports we issued in the spring of 2013, we issued a service reduction illustration to showing how system-wide reductions could be determined using our new service guidelines. That provided the basis for our current proposal, which we went on to do further work on, and our current proposal for service reductions was originally released last November of 2013 to provide ample time to conduct public outreach, which we have conducted, and which included an unprecedented amount of detail about proposed service changes on our Metro online website, including then applicable information about the expected loss of our Alaskan Way Viaduct service contract with WashDOT. We conducted numerous public meetings. We had a rolling information table in the form of an outreach van, visited many transit centers and other locations around King County. We used online surveys, email and letter correspondence among the strategies to inform and to hear from the public. Over 15,000 people participated in some form of outreach and feedback to Metro in that process. And as we indicated throughout this period, our proposal for up to 17% service cuts system-wide, or about 600,000 annual service hours of our approximately 3.5 million annual hour system, was based on our adopted 2013 and 14 budget. And we also indicated we are also using the most current financial and sales tax projections from the Office of Economic and Financial Analysis that was issued in March to finalize a proposal to transmit to the Council in April. So based on our analysis of the OEFA sales tax forecast, we expect to transmit a proposal of approximately 550,000 annual service hours instead of the 600,000 annual hours initially proposed, again, if Proposition 1 is not adopted by voters. So consequently, while somewhat more modest service reductions are a positive turn, overall these reductions are still nearly 16% of our current service levels, and the impacts on individual riders in our region's overall transportation system will remain substantial. So just to provide a high-level basis of comparison, while our original proposal was to eliminate 74 routes, the revised proposal would eliminate 72 routes. And the number of routes that would be revised is lowered from 107 to 84. So with the ability to reduce the proposal by 50,000 annual hours, Metro was able to use our service guidelines to, on certain routes, retain longer hours of night service, mitigate the reduction of some peak service reductions by keeping a few more bus trips in the schedule, and maintain some midday service. It is our expectation that the transmittal of this ordinance would occur following the vote if it is needed. So to provide more context on our financial forecasts and the use of those in King County and Metro's budgeting, Mr. Dively is going to take over at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sure. Councilmember Hague has a question for you, Victor.
Yeah, and I want to thank you both very much for being here today. This is a subject that many of us are hearing about from our constituents. And I just wanted to make sure that in the interest of transparency, that Metro is doing everything it can to update its website so that voters that are looking at the impact of some increased sales tax revenue know exactly how this is affecting anything that they're voting on. So I hope that you can give us some good news that this is being updated very quickly.
We have continued to put out information since we received the forecasts in March, and we are in the process of finalizing an ordinance that would be transmitted that is the basis of information on the web, which we will also begin posting this week.
I guess I'm not sure that I heard an answer to my question, and that is, what are you doing to quickly, in the interest of transparency, post on your website what you're doing with the increased sales tax revenue?
Again, the information about the forecast, we've provided some of that. We will be putting out information related to the size of the proposed reduction if need to go forward. There are 1,001 details with respect to every route change that would be part of this ordinance.
I'm not asking for details on route changes.
We will provide broad information, as we're describing today, on the expected adjustments of the proposal from November to later this month as it is delivered to the council.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I just, at the very least, I am really persuaded by the number of constituents that we're hearing from that believe that because we're seeing an increase in sales tax, that the issue before the voters is really a moot issue. And so I just want to urge Metro to at least maybe put on the website ASAP a copy of your remarks, Victor, so that they can see how we have tracked this and we're transparent about it. Enough said, I guess.
And understood, and we are committed to doing that.
Yeah, I would echo Councilmember Hague's comments there. As I understand it, you have on your website a transparency center, right? I mean, there's a place where folks can go, and maybe we can get that link here in the course of this discussion. But what I've heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to boil this down, and Dwight will update us here. But revenue's up some, at least for the short term. And while we may not have to do 600,000 hours of cuts, the current plan calls for that you are expected to transmit shortly 550,000 hours of cuts. So instead of a Category 5 hurricane, we've got a Category 4.5 hurricane, is my takeaway on that. But I think our constituents are rightly asking, what are you doing with the additional money, and isn't that enough? And that was one of the things we wanted to hear about today. Councilmember Hague.
And may I follow up, Mr. Chair, by just saying I see in our audience our Director of Communications here, and it might be helpful on the council's website to put a link to this meeting of TREE and the particular period of time in which on that link we're discussing this issue, so that, again, there's another opportunity for public education.
That's a great idea, and I think Jason will help us do that. Councilmember Up the Grove, you're okay? Okay. Mr. Dively, on the OEFA side, the finance side.
Great, thank you. For the record, Dwight Dively, I'm the Director of the Office of Performance Strategy and Budget. So I think to help with today's discussion, I have 6 particular points I think I would like to make. So first of all, I know all of you know this, but people who might be watching probably don't. we have an independent forecast office here at King County that develops our revenue forecast. It works jointly for the council and for the executive. And the idea is to remove any kind of politics from the forecasting process. The Forecast Council and the staff of the Forecast Council develop a forecast 3 times a year. There's one in March, there's one in July, and one in August. And so that's the information we use and the council uses in making decisions about budgets and transit planning and so on. So just so everyone understands where the numbers come from. A second point to make, so the change in the sales tax forecast for Metro Transit between the adopted budget, which used figures from about a year and a half ago, to the figures that came out last month in March, in the near term is about $30 million per year. So for 2014, for example, the forecast is up about $30 million. Further out into the future, those forecasts converge, and the difference is only about $15 million a year. The reason for that is most forecast models will recognize that if growth happens sooner, subsequent growth is probably going to be a little smaller. So they tend to converge back to roughly the same level. So that's really good news, that the forecast is up by $30 million. But we need to put some context around that. So the third point I'd like to make this morning is to recognize that the Transit Now forecast, the forecast that was adopted the last time the voters voted on a sales tax increase for transit, for 2014, was $180 million more than our current forecast. So even though the current forecast is up $30 million, it's still $180 million less than was expected prior to the Great Recession. And that just gives you a sense of the order of magnitude of that recession.
And Dwight, if I can interrupt you, that was just for this year.
That was just for this year.
And you at Metro began to build a system to carry that Transit Now delivery out
into the future. And in fact, the gap, if you look at the numbers, the gap gets larger every subsequent year. So if you go out, let's say 7 or 8 years, it's over $200 million difference on an annual basis. So a fourth point I think that's important to recognize, that the sales tax change is important, but it's only one of many factors that affect transit's finances. So it's important to understand that there are other changes that have either been made by policy or just have happened that make a difference. So for example, transit for years now has sustained its service levels by drawing down its reserves. It has postponed bus purchases that now need to be made. It has adopted new policies, or the council has adopted new policies, things like the low-income fare, which have valuable public policy benefits, but also reduce revenue and have administrative expenses. So I've actually talked to folks who said, well, geez, the congestion reduction charge is going away, but you have this extra $30 million. Don't those kind of cancel out? And they don't, because of all the other things that have to be factored into the equation as well. And then finally, part of the forecast that we are using is we're looking out into the future and we're saying, well, we need to start preparing for the next recession. And so the council adopted policies a few years ago, really good policies in my opinion, to have a revenue stabilization reserve for the transit system, so that in good times you start to put away money to buffer the next recession and the impact it has on sales tax. And in fact, that reserve is largely how transit has preserved services this far. Now's the time we have to start rebuilding that, because probably by the end of this decade, we'll have another recession. And so we did a little modeling around a mild recession, nothing like the last two that we've been through, much milder than that. And even at the $550,000 or 50,000 hour reduction, if you model that next recession in 2018, 2019, you use up the entire revenue stabilization reserve at that point. So we think this is a prudent and conservative proposal that recognizes the fact that revenue is a little higher in the near term, but also prepares transit to have a sustainable future.
So if I can make sure I understand what you're saying there, we built a rainy day fund. The rainy day came. In fact, it was a torrential downpour in that Great Recession. We have mostly used up the rainy day fund to keep buses on the road. And in fact, we quit doing things that we normally would do, which is like buy new buses.
Right.
And we're about out of money in terms of reserves, as I understand it. And so while we're up $15 million over the longer-term forecast per year, we have a $75 million structural deficit, as I understand it, on terms of the operating and the capital. That doesn't fill a whole lot of that.
Right. That's exactly right.
All right. Other members have questions? With respect to timing, for those that are interested in getting more information, real-time information, it sounds like, Victor, that Metro is taking a hard look at, given the new numbers, what the transit service reductions would look like, which would be starting to implement this fall, right, in terms of 1 of 4.
Correct.
When do you expect to deliver to the public, either via the website, as Councilmember Hague has suggested, or with an actual ordinance transmitted to the council, that detailed information?
Well, we have preliminary information that we can release as early as today.
Okay.
So we will get information to the public to provide them background, mindful that we're still in the final development, final review of what would become an ordinance to the council later this month. So we have working papers and documents, and we'll do our best to provide accurate, current information to people.
And I guess if you, my members will indulge me, I have another question, Victor. In looking at the numbers that were provided from Metro, it looked to me like your costs were growing from 2008 to 2012 at about 2.4% per year in the system, and that was lower by several basis points than your peer transit agencies around the country in terms of the top 30. What is Metro doing to continue, regardless of other revenue options, to continue your efforts to get more efficient and to bring the cost per hour of service down?
Mm-hmm. We have and will continue to examine every aspect of our operation. So looking at operator assignments, looking at extra board operators, looking at vehicle maintenance. Last week we ran a lean process to examine our inventory for vehicle parts. We have many different fleets. We have some inefficiencies in that process that can be streamlined, and so we're working to do that. In every aspect of our operation, we continue to pursue those sorts of changes to reduce ongoing costs, eliminate costs where possible, and to increase the efficiency of our operation.
All right, that's helpful. And just from an operational perspective at Metro, is there a way to save ourselves out of this crisis? Can we cut enough costs to not have to do the service reductions in terms of hours? Is that possible?
It is only possible with additional revenue.
Thank you for that information. Mr. Risha, do you have anything further to add on this item?
No, I can validate that from on staff analytics side, we've been working with the transit division to look at those issues. And are they done from an efficiency standpoint? No. And we've been very impressed with their embracing of lean and some of the continued work. So they fully are aware they're not done yet, but are very embracing how do we continue to improve as an organization. We as a staff team are not sure how you would cut your way out unless you are reducing service. You have gone over the past number of years with a very aggressive partnership with the executive at looking at efficiencies of operations, at changes to planning structures and operational staff, and the transit division and the executive have responded very strongly through to the performance audit that was conducted a number of years ago, and even areas where we as staff thought that they would never go, they have actually acted on every aspect of that performance audit. So from that standpoint, we've been very impressed with the work that they've been doing, and we continue to work with them on it.
Now, Councilmember Hague was a leader in requiring that audit, and it had more than 100 recommended changes. Victor, is it correct that nearly every one of those changes have been implemented by the division?
That's correct.
All right. Any other questions or comments from members? Thank you for providing this update. Website, if folks want to go, we'll have it on our King County Council website as soon as we receive it from you. And Metro Transit, you'll put this update on your website as well.
Yeah, type into Metro Online. There's a logo on the homepage. And the Transparency Center is referred to as the Accountability Center as a tab down below.
Accountability Center. All right. Thank you for coming today. All right. If there are no further items to come before this committee, we are adjourned.